cold billionaire felt he escaped his past, not until the innocent woman he hurt came back for revenge. Hello, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Dr. Tom's Love Tales. I hope you're having an incredible day, and I want to start by saying thank you. Thank you for the amazing comments, the likes, the shares, and all the love you showed on part 1 of this incredible story. Your engagement is what keeps me motivated to craft these emotional journeys for you, and I read every single comment with such gratitude. If you watched part 1, which is titled, "You're a Fraud," the billionaire said, so one night she proved herself and then gave him her first time. Now he begs to have her. You know, we left George and Jemma at their highest moment, engaged on stage at Madison Square Garden, their love story seemingly complete. But you also know that Bella was watching from the shadows, planning revenge that would test their love in ways we never expected. So, if this is your first time here and you haven't watched part 1, please pause this video right now. Hit the like button and quickly check the pinned comment or description for the link to part 1. It's the last uploaded video before this one on the channel. Trust me, you need that foundation to fully understand the emotional earthquake that's about to happen. I'll wait right here for you. For those ready to continue this journey, prepare yourself, because what you're about to witness will break your heart, challenge everything you believe about justice, and ultimately show you that love can transcend even death itself. This is part 2, and I promise you, nothing will ever be the same. Let's begin. 6 months had passed since that magical night at Madison Square Garden, when George proposed in front of 20,000 cheering fans. Now, on a perfect spring morning in Nashville, the couple stood before their closest friends and family in the most intimate ceremony either had ever dreamed of. The venue was a private garden at their renovated estate, transformed into something that felt like a fairy tale. White roses cascaded from every archway, and soft acoustic music played as guests took their seats on elegant wooden chairs. Only 50 people were invited, the friends who had supported them through their darkest moments, and the industry colleagues who had witnessed their incredible redemption story. Jemma walked down the petal-strewn aisle, wearing a simple but stunning dress that seemed to glow in the morning sunlight. Her hair fell in loose waves over her shoulders, and she carried a bouquet of white peonies, the same flowers George had sent her during their courtship. But it was her smile that took everyone's breath away. Pure, radiant joy that seemed to light up the entire garden. George stood at the altar in a classic black tuxedo, but his eyes never left Jemma's face. Gone was any trace of the calculating businessman or the broken exile he had once been. This was a man who had found his purpose, his peace, and his forever in the woman walking toward him. When the officiant asked them to share their personal vows, George spoke first, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "Jemma, when I first met you, I was a man who had lost his way completely. I thought success meant taking what I wanted without caring who got hurt. But you showed me what real strength looks like, the courage to forgive, the wisdom to see potential for good even in broken people, and the faith to believe that love can truly transform a soul." He paused, looking directly into her eyes. "I promise to never let our past define our future. I promise to spend every day earning the love you've given me so freely, and I promise that the man who stands before you today, the man you helped me become, will love you with everything he has until his last breath." Jemma's own vows brought tears to every eye in the garden. "George, you taught me that sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the most broken instruments. Our love story began with betrayal, but it bloomed into something more beautiful than any song I could ever write. You are my harmony, my rhythm, my everything." Her voice broke slightly as she continued. "I promise to stand by you through every storm, to believe in us even when the world doubts, and to love you not despite your past, but because of how beautifully you've risen from it. Today, we're not just getting married, we're choosing to write a new song together, one built on truth, trust, and endless love." When they kissed as husband and wife, the garden erupted in applause and cheers. But for George and Jemma, the rest of the world faded away. They were lost in that perfect moment, surrounded by love and hope for the future they would build together. The months following their wedding were like a dream Jemma wanted to wake up from. Their collaborative album Second Chances had not only topped charts worldwide, but had become a cultural phenomenon. The raw honesty of their music resonated with millions of people who had experienced their own betrayals, heartbreaks, and healing journeys. Their world tour sold out within hours of tickets going on sale. From intimate acoustic venues to massive stadiums, George and Jemma performed their love story night after night, watching audiences sing along to songs that had been born from their deepest pain and greatest joy. The chemistry between them on stage was electric, but it was the genuine love and respect they showed each other that made their performances truly magical. Record labels were offering them contracts worth tens of millions of dollars. Book publishers wanted them to write their memoir. Movie producers were calling about film rights to their story. But George and Jemma approached every opportunity with the wisdom they had gained through their trials, choosing projects that honored their journey, rather than just maximizing profit. "We're not interested in fame for its own sake," Jemma told reporters during a joint interview. "We want our platform to mean something, to help other people heal and believe in second chances." Their Nashville estate became a sanctuary where they could retreat from the public eye and focus on what mattered most, each other and the life they were building together. They spent evenings writing songs in their home studio, cooking dinner together in their renovated kitchen, and talking for hours about their dreams for the future. One evening, as they sat together on their back porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, Jemma broached the subject that had been on both their minds for weeks. "George," she said softly, curling up against his side, "I've been thinking about something." "What's that, my love?" he replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I want to have your children," she said simply, looking up at him with eyes full of hope and love. "I want to carry babies that have your eyes and my stubbornness. I want to teach them to play piano while you teach them guitar. I want to fill this house with the sound of little feet and laughter and music." George's heart swelled with emotion as he cupped her face in his hands. "Jemma, there's nothing in this world I want more than to have a family with you. I want mini versions of you running around our house, inheriting your incredible talent and beautiful heart." They began planning immediately, approaching parenthood with the same intentionality they brought to everything else in their lives. They met with fertility specialists to ensure they were in optimal health. They started taking prenatal vitamins and making lifestyle changes to prepare their bodies for pregnancy. But more than the medical preparations, they spent countless hours talking about the kind of parents they wanted to be. They discussed names, both traditional family names and unique choices that honored their musical heritage. They planned how they would share their love of music with their children, without pressuring them to follow in their footsteps. "I want our children to know they're loved unconditionally," George said one night as they lay in bed discussing baby nursery designs. "I want them to understand that family means showing up for each other, no matter what. And I want them to know the story of how their parents found each other, the whole story, including the mistakes and the forgiveness. They'll grow up understanding that everyone deserves second chances," Jemma agreed, resting her hand on her still flat stomach. "And that love really can conquer anything, when people are willing to do the hard work of change and growth." They began renovating one of the spare bedrooms into a nursery, choosing soft colors and musical themes. George installed soundproofing so their future children could nap peacefully even when they were recording. Jemma picked out books about music and love and adventure to read to their babies. Everything in their life seemed perfectly aligned, their love stronger than ever, their careers flourishing, their future bright with possibility. They had overcome the ultimate betrayal and emerged not just intact but more powerful than ever. Neither of them knew that their greatest happiness was about to become the target of someone who had been watching, waiting, and planning their destruction with meticulous care. The peace they had fought so hard to build was about to be shattered by a force they never saw coming. "Family, I'm getting emotional just narrating their happiness, and I know you are too. If you think they deserve this happiness after everything they've been through, drop a heart in the comments." 3,000 miles away from George and Jemma's Nashville paradise, Bella Martinez sat in a cramped studio apartment in a forgotten corner of Detroit, surrounded by newspaper clippings, printed photos, and detailed notes about the couple's daily routines. The contrast between her current reality and their glamorous life couldn't have been more stark. The apartment was barely 400 square feet, with peeling wallpaper and a radiator that clanked through the night. Water stains marked the ceiling, and the single window looked out onto an alley where stray cats fought over scraps from overflowing dumpsters. This was what her life had become since the scandal destroyed her career 3 years ago, but the physical squalor paled in comparison to the darkness that had consumed Bella's heart. Every surface in the apartment was covered with evidence of her obsession. Photos of George and Jemma at red carpet events, screenshots of their social media posts, detailed timelines of their appearances and interviews. She had been tracking their every move for months, studying their security patterns, learning their habits, and feeding the rage that grew stronger every day. On her cracked laptop screen, articles about their success played on repeat. Power couple's Second Chances album breaks records. George and Jemma land and announce world tour sellout. Music's greatest redemption story continues to inspire millions. Each headline was another knife twist in her already bleeding heart. Bella's plan was elegantly simple in its brutality. A two-pronged attack designed to destroy everything George had built with the same systematic precision he had once used to steal from struggling artists. First, she would obliterate them financially, using their love and trust against them. Then, when George was at his most vulnerable and confused, she would eliminate him physically, ensuring he could never enjoy another moment of the happiness built on her ruined dreams. Over the past 6 months, Bella had used the last of her savings to recruit the necessary players for her revenge. She had connections in Detroit's underground world, people who owed favors, people who worked for cash and asked no questions, people whose services could be bought by someone desperate enough to pay any price. The cyber criminal she had hired was a 20-something hacker known only as Ghost, who operated from a basement across town. For $10,000, money Bella had borrowed against her mother's house, Ghost had agreed to infiltrate Gemma's phone and create the technology needed for Bella's deception. The street gang she had contracted was led by a man called Tank, whose crew specialized in making accidents look convincing. Another $15,000 had secured their services for what Bella described as teaching someone a lesson they'll never forget. Every dollar spent brought her closer to bankruptcy, but Bella didn't care. Money meant nothing when you had already lost everything that mattered. Her career was dead, her reputation destroyed, her future erased. All that remained was the burning need to make George Landon pay for what he had taken from her. The setup phase had taken weeks of meticulous preparation. Ghost had created a sophisticated malware package disguised as a congratulatory message from a major music awards organization. The email appeared to come from the Grammy Awards committee, complete with official letterhead and believable language about a special honor being considered for George and Jemma. Congratulations on your incredible journey and musical achievements, the email read. We would like to invite you to preview an exclusive video tribute created in your honor. Please click the secure link below to access this private content. When Jemma clicked the link, trusting, unsuspecting Jemma, who still believed the world was fundamentally good, the malware silently installed itself on her phone. Within minutes, Ghost had access to everything: her contacts, her call logs, her text messages, her banking apps, and most importantly, her voice. The AI voice cloning technology was the most expensive part of the operation, but it was also the most crucial. Using hours of Gemma's recent interviews, podcast appearances, and social media videos, the software learned the subtle inflections, the breathing patterns, the emotional cadences that made her voice uniquely hers. After 2 weeks of processing, the AI could replicate Gemma's voice so perfectly that even George wouldn't be able to tell the difference during a brief phone call, but timing was everything. Bella needed George to be at his most public, most vulnerable moment when the attack came. She needed the humiliation to be witnessed by as many people as possible, and she needed the shock to be so devastating that George would make emotional decisions rather than rational ones. The perfect opportunity came when George was booked for a live international interview on Global Voices, a show that reached over 50 million viewers worldwide. The topic was to be their love story as inspiration for second chances, with George appearing alone while Jemma supposedly stayed home to work on new music. The Global Voices studio in Los Angeles was a marvel of modern television production, with sleek white furniture, dramatic lighting, and cameras positioned to capture every nuance of expression. George sat across from host Rebecca Chen, looking relaxed and handsome in a navy blue suit that brought out his gray eyes. George Landon, thank you for joining us today. Rebecca began with her trademark warm smile. Your story with Jemma has captivated the world. Tell us how it feels to have built such an incredible life together after everything you both went through. George's face lit up as he began talking about Jemma. Rebecca, I can honestly say that my wife saved my soul and taught me what real love means. When I first met Jemma, I was a broken man who had lost his way completely. I had hurt people, including her, in ways I'm still ashamed of today. The interviewer leaned forward, clearly moved by his honesty. But she gave you a second chance. She did more than that, George replied, his voice thick with emotion. She saw something in me that I had forgotten existed. She believed I could change when I didn't even believe it myself. And then she loved me through the process of becoming the man I always should have been. As the interview continued, George spoke about their music, their tour, and their plans for the future. "We're actually starting to plan for a family," he revealed, causing Rebecca's eyes to widen with delight. "Jemma would be an incredible mother. She has this way of seeing the best in everyone, of nurturing potential and helping it grow. I can't wait to watch her with our children." He talked about the foundation they were planning to establish for struggling artists, about the importance of second chances, about how their love had taught him that real success meant lifting others up rather than tearing them down. "Your wife isn't here today," Rebecca noted. "What is she doing while you're sharing your story with the world?" "She's at home working on some new songs," George said with a loving smile. "Jemma is always creating something beautiful. Even as we speak, she's probably at our piano, turning some emotion or experience into music that will touch people's hearts." What George didn't know was that, 3,000 miles away, Ayla was watching the interview live on her laptop, her finger hovering over the button that would activate Ghost's malware and begin the destruction of everything George held dear. At exactly 3:17 am Pacific time, as George was in the middle of describing how Jemma's forgiveness had changed his perspective on life, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. The caller ID showed Jemma's name and her favorite photo, the one from their wedding day where she was laughing with pure joy. George glanced at Rebecca apologetically. "I'm so sorry, but this is my wife. She never calls during interviews unless it's urgent." "Of course, take the call," Rebecca said graciously. "We'll pause for a moment." George excused himself and answered with a smile. "Hey, beautiful, everything okay?" The voice that came through the phone was unmistakably Jemma's, the same sweet tone, the same slight Nashville accent she had picked up, the same way she said his name with extra warmth. "George, I'm so sorry to bother you during the interview, but I need your help with something urgent," the AI-generated voice said, perfectly mimicking Jemma's speech patterns. "I'm trying to transfer some money for that charity donation we discussed, but the bank is asking for additional verification. They need the routing numbers and account passwords for all our accounts to process the large transfer." George didn't hesitate for even a second. This was his wife, his partner, his other half. Of course he would help her with anything she needed. "No problem, love. Hold on." He grabbed a pen and paper from the table beside him. "Are you recording this so you don't have to write it down while you're at the piano?" "Yes, I'm recording it," the fake Jemma replied smoothly. "You're the best, George. I love you so much." For the next 3 minutes, George carefully recited sensitive banking information for 6 different accounts: their joint checking and savings, their business account, their investment portfolio, and their separate personal accounts they had maintained. Account numbers, routing numbers, passwords, security questions, everything a cybercriminal would need to drain every penny they had worked so hard to earn. "Got it all, sweetheart," the cloned voice said. "Thank you so much, you're amazing. Now go finish that interview and tell the world how much I love you." "I love you too," George said warmly. "See you at home tonight." As he hung up and turned back to Rebecca with an apologetic smile, George had no idea that in a server farm outside Detroit, automated transfers were already being initiated. Millions of dollars were being routed through a complex network of offshore accounts, cryptocurrency exchanges, and untraceable digital wallets. "Sorry about that," George told Rebecca as the cameras rolled again. "My wife needed help with a charity donation. She's always thinking about ways to give back to the community." Rebecca smiled warmly. "That's beautiful. You were telling us about the foundation you're planning to establish." George launched back into his description of their dreams for helping young artists avoid the predatory practices he had once engaged in. He talked about creating safe spaces for musicians to develop their talents, about providing legal resources to protect them from exploitation, about using their platform to advocate for fairer treatment of artists throughout the industry. But as he spoke, his phone began buzzing incessantly. At first he tried to ignore it, but the notifications kept coming. Ding after ding after ding, each one another debit alert from his banking apps. "I'm so sorry," he said to Rebecca, his brow furrowing as he glanced at his phone. "Something seems to be wrong with my—" His voice trailed off as he saw the notifications flooding his screen. Transfer of $2.3 million from joint checking account. Transfer of $4.1 million from business account. Transfer of $1.8 million from savings account. Transfer of $6.2 million from investment portfolio. George's face went white as he watched their entire fortune disappearing in real time. Account after account showed the same thing. Massive transfers initiated just minutes after he had provided the banking information to who he thought was his wife. "Jemma, what have you done?" The words escaped his lips before he could stop them. his voice carrying clearly through the studio microphones to millions of viewers around the world. Rebecca looked confused and concerned. "George? Is everything all right?" But George was already standing up, ripping off his microphone, his face a mask of shock and devastation. Without another word, he stormed off the set, leaving Rebecca and millions of viewers stunned and confused about what could have possibly gone wrong with America's favorite love story. Within minutes of George's dramatic exit from the live interview, social media exploded with speculation and concern. George and Jemma began trending worldwide as fans tried to understand what had happened to their beloved couple. News outlets picked up the story immediately. George Landon storms off live TV after mysterious phone call. What happened to America's favorite music couple? George Landon's shocking interview meltdown goes viral. Entertainment reporters scrambled to get statements from anyone connected to the couple. Their publicist, their manager, their record label. Everyone was bombarded with calls and emails demanding answers about the dramatic scene that had played out on live television. Meanwhile, George was racing through Los Angeles traffic toward the airport, his phone ringing non-stop with calls from concerned friends, confused business partners, and opportunistic journalists. But he ignored them all. His mind focused on only one thing: getting home to Nashville and confronting his wife about what appeared to be the ultimate betrayal. Meanwhile, Bella watched the chaos unfold with cold satisfaction in her Detroit apartment. Phase 1 of her plan had worked perfectly. George's world was crumbling in the most public way possible, and he had no idea that the real nightmare was just beginning. The sweet revenge she had dreamed of for 3 years was finally becoming reality, and George Landon was about to learn that some sins could never be forgiven, no matter how much love and redemption he thought he had found. What would you do if someone you trusted completely seemed to betray you? Share your thoughts below. The gentle melody of Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major filled the sunlit music studio of the Landon estate as Jemma sat at the grand piano with 3 of her most dedicated students. At 19, 21, and 16 respectively, these young musicians had been coming to her home studio twice a week for the past 6 months, drawn not just by her incredible talent, but by her genuine warmth and encouraging teaching style. "Remember, music isn't just about hitting the right notes," Jemma was saying, her fingers dancing gracefully across the keys as she demonstrated a particularly challenging passage. "It's about telling a story, about letting the emotion flow through your fingertips and into the hearts of everyone listening." The youngest student, a shy girl named Amy, who reminded Jemma of herself at that age, nodded eagerly as she tried to replicate the technique. "Like this, Mrs. Landon? Perfect." Jemma beamed, her face glowing with pride. "You're getting it. The key is to trust yourself and let the music guide you." The atmosphere in the room was peaceful and nurturing, filled with the kind of pure joy that comes from sharing something you love with people who appreciate it. Jemma had been in her element all afternoon, completely absorbed in the simple pleasure of teaching and creating music with these talented young people. She had no idea that across the country, her husband was experiencing the worst moment of his life on live television. She hadn't seen the news alerts flooding social media, or the frantic calls from their publicist. Her phone was on silent in her purse, tucked away in the corner so it wouldn't disturb the lesson. The first sign that something was wrong came when they heard a car door slam violently in the driveway, followed by heavy footsteps pounding up the front steps. Jemma looked up from the piano with mild concern, wondering why George would be home so early from his interview. Then the front door crashed open with such force that it hit the wall behind it, and George's voice could be heard throughout the house, not the warm, loving tone she was used to, but something raw and terrible that made her blood run cold. "Jemma! Jemma, where are you?" The students exchanged nervous glances as Jemma quickly stood up from the piano bench, her heart already racing with fear and confusion. George's footsteps were thundering through the house now, getting closer to the music studio with each passing second. When he burst through the studio doors, Jemma barely recognized the man standing before her. This wasn't her husband, her partner, her other half. This was a stranger with wild eyes, disheveled hair, and a face contorted with fury and devastation, unlike anything she had ever seen. "George?" she said softly, instinctively moving closer to her students as if to protect them from whatever storm was about to break. "What's wrong? How did the interview go? How did the interview go?" George repeated, his voice dripping with bitter sarcasm. "How did the interview go? You want to know how it went, Jemma? It went perfectly, until my loving wife decided to steal every penny we've ever earned while I was on live television, telling the world how much I trust her." Jemma's face went white with shock and confusion. George, I don't understand what you're talking about. I haven't called you since you left the house this morning. I've been here teaching all afternoon. Don't lie to me, George shouted, his voice echoing off the studio walls and making the students shrink back in fear. Don't you dare stand there and lie to my face after what you've done. George pulled out his phone with shaking hands, his fingers fumbling as he accessed his call log. Look at this, he demanded, shoving the screen toward Jemma's face. Look at this call from you at 3:17 p.m. Listen to this recording of your voice asking me for our banking information. Jemma stared at the phone screen in disbelief, seeing her own name and photo listed as an incoming call from just hours ago. But the confusion in her eyes was genuine, her bewilderment complete. George, I swear to you I never made that call, she said, her voice trembling. I don't know what's happening, but I haven't touched my phone since this morning. Look, it's been in my purse the whole time. She rushed to the corner of the room where her purse sat, pulling out her phone with hands that shook so badly she almost dropped it. See, I have 17 missed calls from you, from our manager, from people I don't even recognize. My phone has been on silent for the lesson. But George was beyond reason now, his pain and shock making him incapable of thinking clearly. All he could see was the evidence on his phone, call logs that showed Jemma's number, transaction records that proved someone with access to their banking information had stolen everything they had worked for. Then explain this, he shouted, pulling up his banking app and showing her screen after screen of devastating transfers. Explain how every single account we have is now empty. Explain how someone who knew our account numbers, our passwords, our security questions, just stole $12 million while I was on live television. Jemma's face went ashen as she saw the transaction records. Account after account showed the same thing, massive transfers initiated just hours ago, leaving balances of zero across their entire financial portfolio. Oh my God, she whispered, sinking onto the piano bench as the magnitude of what had happened began to sink in. George, I didn't do this. You have to believe me. I would never ever do anything to hurt you or us. I love you more than my own life. But George was too far gone in his devastation to hear her. All he could think about was that phone call, that voice that had sounded exactly like hers, asking for information that only she would need. Stop lying, George roared, his control finally snapping completely. Stop pretending you don't know what you've done. I trusted you with everything, my heart, my future, my entire life, and you betrayed me worse than I ever betrayed you. The slap came without warning, his hand connecting with Jemma's cheek with a sharp crack that seemed to echo through the studio like a gunshot. The three students gasped in horror, Amy beginning to cry as she watched her idol crumble before her eyes. Jemma fell to her knees, not from the physical impact but from the emotional devastation of being struck by the man she loved more than anything in the world. Her hand went to her cheek, already red and stinging, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the agony in her heart. How can you transfer all the millions from all accounts and still lie to my face? George continued, his voice breaking with anguish. Only God knows if you're planning on running away with our joint efforts to reach this level. How could you do this to us, Jemma? How could you destroy everything we built? Tears streamed down Jemma's face as she looked up at him from the floor, her voice barely a whisper. George, please. I know how this looks, but I swear on my parents' graves I didn't do this. Someone is trying to destroy us. Please, you have to believe me. But George was already turning away, his own tears mixing with rage and heartbreak. I can't even look at you right now, he said, his voice hollow. I thought we had healed from our painful past. I thought what we had was real, but apparently I was just the same fool I've always been. The students were crying now, traumatized by witnessing the destruction of a love story they had believed in. Amy was sobbing openly, while the other two sat frozen in shock at seeing their mentor's world crumble in real time. Please leave, Jemma whispered to them through her tears. Go home to your families. I'm so sorry you had to see this. As the young musicians gathered their things and hurried out of the studio, Jemma remained on her knees on the hardwood floor, staring at the proof of her supposed betrayal on George's phone screen. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, and completely impossible to explain. George paced the studio like a caged animal, his mind racing as he tried to process what felt like the ultimate betrayal. You know what kills me most, he said, his voice raw with pain. It's not just the money. Money can be earned back. It's that you looked me in the eyes this morning and told me you loved me. You kissed me goodbye and wished me luck with the interview. And all the while, you were planning to destroy everything we built together. I wasn't planning anything, Jemma cried from the floor. "George, someone is doing this to us. Someone who wants to tear us apart. Can't you see that?" "Who?" George demanded. "Who would do this? Who else has access to our accounts? Who else would you share our banking information with?" "It was your voice on that call, Jemma. Your voice asking me for passwords and account numbers." Jemma had no answer. The evidence was too perfect, too complete. Someone had managed to make it look like she was responsible for their financial destruction, and she had no way to prove her innocence. "I don't know who," she admitted, her voice breaking, "but George, please, use your heart instead of your hurt. You know me. You know my soul. Do you really believe I'm capable of this?" For a moment, George's expression softened as he looked at her broken form on the studio floor. This was the woman who had forgiven him for stealing her music, who had loved him through his darkest period, who had built a beautiful life with him based on trust and redemption. But then his phone buzzed with another notification, a news alert about his dramatic exit from the interview. The humiliation crashed over him again, the reality that millions of people had witnessed his public breakdown, and his heart hardened once more. "I don't know what to believe anymore," he said coldly. "All I know is that my wife called me during a live interview and asked for banking information, and now we're broke. That's what I know." Within an hour of the confrontation, George was in his car, heading to downtown Nashville to meet with his lawyer, David Patterson. The divorce papers had been drawn up with stunning speed, a testament to how thorough and efficient Patterson's practice was when it came to high-profile cases. The media had already descended on their estate like vultures, news vans lining the street, and reporters shouting questions at anyone who came near the property. George had to push through a crowd of cameras and microphones just to reach his car, refusing to answer any questions about what had happened during the interview or why he had left so abruptly. As he drove through Nashville traffic, George's phone continued to ring incessantly. Their manager, their publicist, their record label executives, everyone wanted answers he didn't have. The only calls he answered were from Patterson, confirming their meeting and discussing the legal strategy for recovering the stolen funds. "We'll file fraud charges immediately," Patterson had assured him over the phone, "and we'll freeze any remaining assets to prevent further transfers. But George, you need to be prepared for this to get very public very quickly." George didn't care about the publicity anymore. All he cared about was getting justice and getting away from the woman he thought he knew, but apparently never had. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away, Bella was putting the finishing touches on Phase 2 of her plan. The street gang led by Tank had been positioned along George's most likely route to his lawyer's office for the past hour, waiting for the call that would set the final act of revenge in motion. "He just left the house," Bella said into her burner phone, watching the live news coverage of reporters swarming the Landon estate. "Black Mercedes sedan, heading east toward downtown. License plate Victor Charlie 7891. "Copy that," Tank's gruff voice replied. "We're in position at the intersection of Music Row and Broadway. Big rigs ready to go." Bella felt a cold satisfaction as she ended the call. George Landon had taken everything from her, her career, her reputation, her future. Now she was going to take everything from him, starting with his money and ending with his life. The intersection of Music Row and Broadway was busy enough to provide cover, but isolated enough to ensure the job could be done cleanly. Tank's crew had stolen the 18-wheeler truck that morning from a shipping yard on the outskirts of the city, and they had been practicing the timing for weeks. When George's Mercedes approached the intersection, he was traveling at approximately 35 miles per hour, lost in thought about the confrontation with Jemma and the legal battle ahead. He never saw the massive truck that ran the red light and slammed into the driver's side of his vehicle at full speed. The impact was devastating. George's car was launched sideways across the intersection, rolling 5 complete times before coming to rest upside down against a concrete barrier. The sound of twisted metal and shattered glass echoed through the downtown area as other drivers slammed on their brakes and reached for their phones to call 911. Steam rose from the wreckage as George hung upside down in his seatbelt, blood streaming from multiple cuts on his face and a severe gash on his forehead. His left arm was clearly broken, bent at an unnatural angle, and he could taste blood in his mouth from internal injuries he couldn't yet comprehend. But he was conscious, barely, as he heard footsteps approaching the overturned vehicle. Through the spider-webbed windshield, George saw a figure approaching minors, someone in dark clothing with their face hidden by a hood. He tried to call out for help, but his voice came out as barely a whisper. "Help," he managed to croak. "Please, help me." The figure knelt down beside the wreckage and slowly pulled back the hood, to reveal a face George recognized but hadn't seen in 3 years. Bella Martinez looked older, harder, with an expression of cold satisfaction as she stared at his broken form. "You can never escape your past and how you destroyed my life," she said, her voice calm and measured despite the chaos around them. George's eyes widened with recognition and horror as the pieces finally fell into place. The phone call that had sounded like Jemma, the perfectly timed financial attack, the accident that was clearly no accident. "Bella," he whispered, blood frothing at the corners of his mouth. You did this." "I did what you taught me to do," she replied, standing up and looking down at him without a trace of mercy. "I took everything you cared about and destroyed it, just like you destroyed me." In the distance, the sound of sirens was growing louder as emergency responders raced toward the scene. Bella glanced around quickly, then looked back down at George one last time. "Enjoy your last few minutes of life, George Landon," she said. "Maybe now you'll understand what it feels like to lose everything." She turned and walked away quickly, disappearing into the crowd of onlookers that had gathered around the accident scene. Tank and his crew were already long gone, the stolen truck abandoned several blocks away after they had transferred to a waiting getaway car. George was barely clinging to life when the paramedics arrived. His injuries were severe: multiple internal bleeding, fractured ribs, a punctured lung, and traumatic head injuries that had the emergency medical team working frantically just to keep him stable during the ride to Vanderbilt University Medical Center. Jemma received the call from the hospital while she was still sitting in their music studio, surrounded by the wreckage of their confrontation. She had been crying for hours, trying to understand how their perfect life had been destroyed so completely in a single afternoon. "Mrs. Landon," the nurse's voice was gentle but urgent. "Your husband has been in a serious car accident. You need to come to the hospital immediately." The drive to the hospital was a blur of tears and traffic, Gemma's hands shaking so badly she could barely steer. None of their earlier fight mattered now. Not the accusations, not the slap, not the divorce papers. All that mattered was getting to George and making sure he survived. She ran through the emergency room doors still wearing the same clothes from their lesson that afternoon, her cheek still bearing the red mark from where he had struck her. The medical staff directed her to the trauma unit, where George was fighting for his life in surgery. For 3 hours, Jemma sat in the waiting room, praying to every deity she could think of to spare the man she loved. When the surgeon finally emerged, his expression told her everything she needed to know before he spoke a word. "Mrs. Landon, we've done everything we can," Dr. Richards said gently. "Your husband's injuries are too severe. He has maybe an hour, possibly less. Would you like to see him?" George was barely recognizable in the hospital bed, connected to machines that beeped steadily as they monitored his failing vital signs. His face was swollen and bandaged, his breathing labored despite the ventilator helping his damaged lungs. When Jemma took his hand, his eyes fluttered open, focusing on her face with tremendous effort. "Jemma," he whispered, his voice so weak she had to lean close to hear him. "My love, I'm sorry. I know you didn't do it." Tears streamed down her face as she squeezed his hand gently. "Don't talk, baby. Save your strength." "No," he insisted, using what little energy he had left. "Need to tell you, someone planned this. Someone who wanted to destroy us, to tear us apart. This wasn't random." The revelation hit Jemma like a physical blow. Someone had deliberately orchestrated their destruction, had used their love and trust against them, to tear apart everything they had built together. "I've loved you since that first night," George continued, his voice growing weaker with each word. "Since you sang in my study and showed me what real music sounds like. Take care of yourself, my love. I think my past has finally caught up with me. I don't think I can fight anymore." "Don't you dare give up," Jemma sobbed, clutching his hand desperately. "I need you, George. We were going to have babies together. We were going to grow old together." But George's eyes were already growing dim, his breathing becoming more shallow, despite the machines working to keep him alive. "Until we meet again, my love," he whispered, using his last breath to tell her one final time how much she meant to him. The heart monitor's steady beep transformed into a long, continuous tone as George's hand went limp in hers. Jemma screamed his name, begging him to come back, but he was gone. The medical staff gently guided her away from the bed as they began the process of declaring time of death and preparing his body. Jemma collapsed in the hallway, her cries echoing through the trauma unit as nurses and doctors looked on with sympathy and sorrow. In the span of 8 hours, she had lost her husband, her fortune, and her future. And somewhere out there, the person responsible for destroying everything was walking free, believing they had finally gotten the revenge they deserved. But this story was far from over, and justice, though delayed, would eventually find its way to the perpetrator's door. Jemma returned to an empty house that felt like a tomb. Every corner held memories of George, his coffee cup still sitting on the kitchen counter from that morning, his favorite sweater draped over the back of their bedroom chair, the sheet music they had been working on together scattered across the piano bench in the studio. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant sound of reporters still camped outside their gates. She had barely been home for an hour when the doorbell rang insistently, followed by heavy knocking. Through the front window, she could see black SUVs parked in her driveway, and men in dark suits standing on her porch. Her heart sank as she realized what was happening. "Mrs. Landon, this is Detective Rodriguez with the Nashville Police Department," a stern voice called through the door. "We have a warrant for your arrest. Please open the door." With trembling hands, Jemma unlocked the door to find 6 law enforcement officers standing on her porch, their expressions grim and professional. Detective Rodriguez, a middle-aged man with graying hair and tired eyes, stepped forward with handcuffs already in his hands. "Jemma Landon, you are under arrest for multiple counts of wire fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree," he announced as he read her rights. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." "Murder," Jemma gasped, her legs nearly giving out beneath her. "I didn't murder anyone. My husband just died in an accident." "Ma'am, we have evidence that you orchestrated both the financial fraud and arranged for your husband's death after he confronted you about the stolen money," Detective Rodriguez said as he placed the handcuffs around her wrists. The accident was no accident. As they led her to the police car, the reporters outside erupted into chaos, cameras flashing and voices shouting questions about her guilt and motives. Jemma kept her head down, still in shock from learning that George's death hadn't been a tragic accident but a calculated murder. The evidence against her was overwhelming and seemingly airtight. Phone records showed calls from her number to George during the interview. Banking records traced the fraudulent transfers back to accounts that had been opened using her personal information. Most damning of all, investigators had found text messages on her phone, messages she had never sent, discussing payment to a gang for taking care of the George problem. "Everything points to you, Mrs. Landon," Detective Rodriguez explained during her interrogation. "The financial motive, the means, the opportunity. You stole $12 million from your joint accounts, and when your husband discovered the theft, you had him killed to prevent him from testifying against you." "None of this is true," Jemma insisted, tears streaming down her face. "Someone is framing me. Someone who wanted to destroy our marriage and our lives. My husband told me before he died that this was planned, that someone deliberately tore us apart. But the evidence was too compelling, too perfectly constructed." The prosecutor painted a picture of a calculating woman who had used her husband's love and trust against him, stealing their fortune and then eliminating him when he became a threat to her freedom. The trial was a media circus that dominated headlines for months. Public opinion was sharply divided between those who believed Jemma was a grieving widow, being wrongfully accused, and those who saw her as a cold-blooded killer who had fooled everyone with her sweet exterior. Music's Black Widow, The Rise and Fall of Jemma Landon, read one tabloid headline. Innocent victim or master manipulator, asked another. Every detail of her life was scrutinized, analyzed, and debated by legal experts, true crime podcasters, and armchair detectives across the country. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. They presented the phone records, the banking evidence, the text messages, and testimonies from digital forensics experts who confirmed that all the fraudulent activity had originated from devices linked to Jemma's identity. Her defense team argued that she had been framed, but they couldn't explain how or by whom. When the verdict came back, guilty on all counts, Jemma felt her world collapse completely. The judge sentenced her to 30 years in federal prison for the fraud charges and accessory to murder in the first degree. As the gavel fell, sealing her fate, Jemma knew she would likely spend the rest of her life behind bars for crimes she hadn't committed. Federal Correctional Institution Danbury was a medium-security women's prison that housed some of the most notorious female criminals in the country. Jemma's high-profile case and celebrity status made her an immediate target, so she was placed in protective custody for her own safety. Her cell was a 6-by-8-foot concrete box with a narrow window that showed only a sliver of sky. The walls were painted institutional green, and the only furniture was a metal bed frame with a thin mattress, a small desk, and a toilet. This would be her home for the next 3 decades. The daily routine was monotonous and soul-crushing. Wake up at 5 a.m. for head count. Breakfast in the cafeteria under the watchful eyes of guards. Work detail in the prison laundry for 8 hours. Dinner. Lights out at 9 p.m. Every day exactly the same, stretching endlessly into a future that held no hope for freedom. But the physical hardships of prison life paled in comparison to the emotional devastation of grieving George while fighting to prove her innocence. Every night, Jemma lay on her narrow bunk staring at the ceiling, replaying their last conversation in the hospital, remembering the love in his eyes when he told her someone had planned their destruction. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away in a coastal town outside Belize City, the woman responsible for Jemma's suffering was discovering that revenge was a hollow victory. Bella Martinez sat on the wraparound porch of her beachfront house, watching the turquoise waters of the Caribbean stretch endlessly toward the horizon. But the beautiful view brought her no peace. The house should have been paradise, a 2-bedroom villa with white walls, terracotta tiles, and windows that caught the ocean breeze. She had paid cash for it, using a fraction of the $12 million she had stolen from George and Jemma. The rest of the money sat untouched in offshore accounts, earning interest she couldn't bring herself to spend. Every morning, Bella woke to the sound of waves and tropical birds, but instead of feeling liberated, she felt trapped in a prison of her own making. The local newspaper, delivered weekly to her mailbox, occasionally carried updates about Jemma's case. Convicted murderer Jemma Landon adapts to prison life, read one headline that made Bella's stomach turn with unexpected guilt. She had gotten everything she wanted. George Landon was dead. His wife was rotting in prison for crimes she didn't commit. Their fortune was now hers. Their perfect love story had been destroyed in the most public and humiliating way possible. So why did she feel so empty? The sleepless nights started about 2 months after George's death. Bella would lie in her comfortable king-sized bed, surrounded by luxury linens and the gentle sound of the ocean, but all she could see when she closed her eyes was George's broken body in that overturned car. She could still hear his voice when she had revealed herself. The shock, the recognition, the devastating realization that his wife was innocent and he was dying for someone else's revenge. "You can never escape your past," she had told him. But now those words felt like a curse she had placed on herself. She couldn't escape what she had done, couldn't unsee Jemma's face in the courtroom when the guilty verdict was read, couldn't unfeel the weight of knowing that an innocent woman was suffering for her crimes. Bella tried to enjoy the fruits of her revenge. She bought expensive clothes that she never wore, had gourmet meals delivered that she barely touched, and hired a housekeeper she didn't need just to have someone else in the house. But nothing filled the void where satisfaction was supposed to be. Late at night, when the tropical paradise felt more like a tropical hell, Bella would walk the beach and replay every decision that had led her to this moment. She had destroyed 3 lives, George's, Jemma's, and her own. And for what? The money meant nothing. The revenge felt like poison in her veins. And the knowledge that she was free while an innocent woman suffered in a prison cell was eating her alive from the inside. "I got what I wanted," she would whisper to the waves, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. She hadn't gotten what she wanted at all. She had wanted her old life back, her career restored, her pain healed. Instead, she had created more pain, more destruction, more loss. As the months passed, the beautiful beach house had become a prison more suffocating than any concrete cell. And unlike Jemma, who was innocent of the crimes she was paying for, Bella knew she deserved every moment of the torment that was slowly destroying her soul. 2 weeks into Jemma's imprisonment, she woke up feeling nauseous and dizzy. At first, she attributed it to the stress of her situation and the terrible prison food. But when the symptoms persisted for several days, the prison medical staff became concerned. "When was your last menstrual period?" asked Dr. Martinez, the prison physician, during a routine medical examination. Jemma tried to remember, but the trauma of the past month had made everything feel like a blur. I'm not sure. With everything that's happened, I haven't been keeping track." The doctor's expression grew serious. "Mrs. Landon, given your symptoms and the timing, I think we need to run a pregnancy test. It's standard protocol for all female inmates." The word pregnancy hit Jemma like a physical blow. In all the chaos of George's death and her arrest, the possibility hadn't even occurred to her. But as she thought back to their last weeks together, when they had been actively trying to start a family, she realized it was entirely possible. And just as she had predicted, the test results came back positive. Jemma stared at the medical report in her cell that evening, her emotions a complex mixture of joy and devastating sadness. She was carrying George's child, the baby they had dreamed about, planned for, wanted so desperately. but she was also facing 30 years in prison, which meant her child would be born behind bars and likely taken away from her immediately. "George," she whispered to his memory, placing her hand on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby, the baby we wanted so much." For the first time since his death, Jemma felt a spark of something that might have been hope. This child was a piece of George that would live on, a tangible connection to the love they had shared. Whatever happened to her, she would do everything in her power to protect this innocent life growing inside her. Pregnancy in federal prison came with its own set of challenges and protocols. Jemma was moved to a different housing unit designed for pregnant inmates, where she received regular medical checkups and nutritional supplements to ensure the baby's healthy development. Dr. Martinez became a source of comfort during this frightening time, treating Jemma with kindness and professionalism despite her criminal status. "Your baby is developing normally," she assured Jemma during one of her weekly appointments. "The heartbeat is strong and all the early indicators look good." Hearing her baby's heartbeat for the first time brought Jemma to tears. In that moment, listening to the rapid flutter that represented new life, she felt George's presence more strongly than she had since his death. This child would carry his DNA, his musical talents, his capacity for love and redemption. "I promise you," she whispered to her growing belly that night in her cell, "I will find a way to prove my innocence. I will find a way to give you the life your father and I dreamed of. Whoever did this to us will pay for what they've taken from our family." The other inmates had mixed reactions to Jemma's pregnancy. Some of the women, particularly those who were mothers themselves, offered protection and advice. They shared tips about navigating the prison medical system, warned her about which guards to avoid, and created an informal support network around her. "You stick close to us, honey," said Rita, a woman serving time for embezzlement, who had become something of a mother figure to Jemma. Some of these women don't take kindly to celebrities, especially ones who supposedly killed their husbands. But a baby changes things. Most of us still have hearts when it comes to protecting children. Others viewed her with suspicion and hostility, believing the prosecution's narrative that she was a calculating killer who deserved whatever hardships came her way. They whispered about her in the cafeteria, made threatening comments during yard time, and generally made it clear that her celebrity status wouldn't protect her if she let her guard down. As her pregnancy progressed and her belly began to show, Jemma faced the terrifying reality that her child would be born in prison and likely placed in foster care or adopted by strangers. The thought of giving birth only to have her baby taken away was almost unbearable, but she held on to the slim hope that somehow, someday, the truth would come to light. Every kick from the baby felt like a message from George, reminding her to stay strong and keep fighting. Their child deserved to know the truth about what had happened to their parents, deserved to understand that their father had been a good man who had truly changed, and their mother was innocent of the crimes that had torn their family apart. Jemma spent her days working in the prison laundry, and her evenings writing letters to lawyers, journalists, and anyone who might be willing to investigate her case. She documented every detail she could remember about the day their lives fell apart, hoping that someone would eventually find the inconsistencies and gaps that proved her innocence. But as the weeks turned into months and her belly grew larger, hope began to feel like a luxury she couldn't afford. The evidence against her seemed unshakable. The system seemed determined to keep her locked away, and her baby was growing closer to being born into a world where they would be separated from the start. Still, every night as she fell asleep in her narrow prison bunk, Jemma whispered the same promise to her unborn child. "I will find a way to prove the truth. I will find a way to give you justice. Your father's love will live on through you, and somehow, we will find our way home, family." I could barely hold back tears writing Jemma's strength through all this pain. If this story is touching your heart, please share it with someone who needs to see how strong the human spirit can be. Also, don't forget to subscribe if you enjoy the story. While Jemma adjusted to life behind bars, David Patterson, George's longtime lawyer, refused to accept that the case was closed. Something about the evidence had always bothered him. It was too perfect, too convenient, too neatly tied together. In his 30 years of practicing law, Patterson had learned to trust his instincts, and his instincts told him that Jemma Landon was innocent. Working from his downtown Nashville office, Patterson assembled a team of digital forensics experts, private investigators, and cybersecurity specialists. "I don't care how long it takes or how much it costs," he told his team during their first meeting. "George Landon was my friend, and I owe it to him to find the truth." The investigation began with the financial fraud that had started everything. Patterson's team traced the stolen $12 million through a complex network of offshore accounts, cryptocurrency exchanges, and shell companies. The money trail was deliberately convoluted, designed to make tracking nearly impossible, but Patterson's experts were among the best in the business. Whoever did this was sophisticated, explained Janet Kim, the lead forensics specialist. They used advanced money laundering techniques and multiple international jurisdictions to hide the funds. But they made one critical mistake. They left digital fingerprints. The breakthrough came 6 weeks into the investigation, when Kim discovered that several of the cryptocurrency wallets used in the money laundering scheme had been funded by a bank account in Detroit. The account belonged to a woman named Bella Martinez. Bella Martinez, Patterson repeated, staring at the name on the bank records. Why does that sound familiar? His assistant quickly pulled up the files from George's original scandal 3 years earlier. She was one of the artists whose career was destroyed when the stolen song scandal broke. Her debut album was built entirely on songs George had stolen and sold to her record label. The pieces began falling into place with devastating clarity. Bella Martinez had motive, means, and opportunity. She had been destroyed by George's actions and had spent years planning her revenge, but proving it would require much more than just financial records. Patterson's team dove deeper into the digital evidence, examining the sophisticated cyber attack that had compromised Jemma's phone. They discovered that the malware used in the attack was a custom-built program that had been purchased from a hacker known only as Ghost, who operated out of Detroit. The voice cloning technology used to impersonate Jemma during that phone call to George is cutting edge, Kim explained. Only a handful of companies in the world have access to AI this advanced. We're tracking down every purchase and rental of this software in the past year. The investigation expanded to include the circumstances of George's death. Patterson hired a private detective named Frank Romano, a former police investigator with connections throughout the criminal underworld. Romano's job was to find the gang members who had carried out the hit-and-run attack. Staged car accidents are a specialty of certain criminal organizations, Romano explained to Patterson. The timing and execution of this attack required professional coordination. Someone paid good money for this hit. As weeks turned into months, Patterson's team assembled a comprehensive picture of Bella Martinez's revenge plot. Bank records showed payments to Ghost for the cyber attack, to a voice cloning company for the AI technology, and to known gang members for the vehicle assault on George. Phone records revealed that Bella had been using burner phones to coordinate the entire operation. Security camera footage from Detroit showed her meeting with gang members and cybercriminals in the weeks leading up to the attack. Most damning of all, they found audio recordings that Bella had made while planning the revenge, apparently as personal documentation of her scheme. She wanted to remember every detail, Kim explained as she played one of the recordings for Patterson. In it, Bella's voice was clear and cold as she described her plans to destroy George and Jemma's marriage, steal their money, and then kill George when he was most vulnerable. The beauty of it is that everyone will blame Jemma, Bella's recorded voice said. She'll go to prison for crimes she didn't commit, and George will die knowing that the woman he loved betrayed him. It's perfect justice for what he did to me. The recording made Patterson's blood run cold. An innocent woman was sitting in federal prison, pregnant and alone, while the real perpetrator walked free. Armed with overwhelming evidence, Patterson contacted the FBI to request an international arrest warrant for Bella Martinez. The investigation revealed that she had fled the United States immediately after George's death, using false identification to travel to a small coastal town in Belize where she believed she could hide indefinitely. We've been tracking her financial activity, FBI agent Lisa Washington explained to Patterson. She's been living under the name Rosa Valdez in a small beach house outside Belize City. We're coordinating with local authorities to make the arrest. When the black SUVs pulled up to Bella's beachfront house at dawn, she was sitting on her porch watching the sunrise over the Caribbean waters, the same spot where she had spent countless sleepless nights tormented by guilt. She saw the vehicles through her security cameras and felt something she hadn't experienced in months: relief. Though still mixed with the faint urge to run, FBI agent Washington approached the front door with her team, weapons drawn and arrest warrant in hand, expecting resistance or an attempt to flee. Instead, they found Bella Martinez sitting calmly in a white wicker chair, her hands visible and empty, wearing a simple sundress that made her look smaller and more fragile than her mugshot suggested. Bella Martinez, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud and racketeering, Agent Washington announced, her voice echoing across the quiet morning beach. "I know," Bella said quietly, standing up slowly with her hands raised. The FBI agents exchanged surprised glances. They had prepared for a chase, a fight, maybe even a hostage situation. They hadn't expected complete surrender from someone who had planned and executed one of the most elaborate revenge schemes in recent memory. As they placed the handcuffs around her wrists, Bella felt a weight lifting from her shoulders that she hadn't realized she was carrying. The metal was cold against her skin, but it felt like freedom after months of being imprisoned by her own guilt. "The revenge barely brought me any peace," she said to Agent Washington as they walked toward the waiting vehicle. "I got everything I thought I wanted, but it solved nothing." "Well, you'll have plenty of time to make a full statement," Agent Washington replied, though her voice had softened. She had arrested hundreds of criminals, but she had rarely seen someone so genuinely broken by their own crimes. The capture of Bella Martinez made international headlines, but the story that emerged was more complex than anyone had expected. "Mastermind behind Landon murder plot surrenders, confesses all," read the front page of USA Today. The security camera footage showed not a defiant criminal being dragged away, but a broken woman walking willingly to justice, her face reflecting the emotional devastation of someone who had destroyed herself in the pursuit of revenge. During her first interview with FBI agents, Bella told the investigators, "I wanted George Landon to suffer the way I had suffered," her voice hollow with exhaustion. "But I didn't just destroy him. I destroyed his innocent wife, their unborn child, and myself. The revenge was supposed to heal my pain, but it only created more pain for everyone involved." Within days of her arrest, Ghost and the gang members who had carried out the hit-and-run attack were also apprehended. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the prospect of life imprisonment, several of them agreed to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for reduced sentences. "Bella Martinez paid us $50,000 to run down George Landon," testified Tank, the gang leader, during a preliminary hearing. "She wanted it to look like an accident, but she made it clear that the goal was to kill him. She said he had destroyed her life, and she was going to destroy his." But Tank also testified about Bella's state of mind during their final meeting. "She looked like a ghost herself by the end," he said. "Like the whole thing was eating her alive. I've worked with a lot of criminals, but I've never seen someone so broken by their own revenge." The legal system moved quickly once the truth came to light. Within 2 weeks of Bella's arrest, Jemma's conviction was overturned, and all charges against her were dropped. Judge Harold Stevens, who had presided over her original trial, issued a formal apology from the bench. "Mrs. Blandon, on behalf of this court and the justice system that failed you, I offer my sincere apologies," Judge Stevens said during the hearing that officially cleared her name. "You have been the victim of an elaborate and calculated frame job, and you should never have spent a single day in prison." The media coverage of Jemma's exoneration was massive, with news outlets around the world covering the story of how an innocent woman had been wrongfully convicted of murdering her own husband. Legal experts called it one of the most sophisticated frame jobs in modern criminal history. "Innocent woman freed after elaborate revenge plot exposed," headlined CNN. "The Jemma Landon case, how justice prevailed," read the Washington Post. Public opinion, which had been divided during her trial, now overwhelmingly supported her and condemned the justice system that had allowed her wrongful conviction. Meanwhile, Bella Martinez was indicted on multiple federal charges, including murder, conspiracy, wire fraud, and identity theft. Prosecutors announced they would seek the death penalty for her role in George's murder and the elaborate scheme that had destroyed an innocent family. On a crisp October morning, 8 months pregnant and showing clearly, Jemma walked out of Federal Correctional Institution Danbury a free woman. The media was waiting, but Patterson had arranged for a secure vehicle to take her directly to a private medical facility, where she could receive proper prenatal care away from the public eye. "How does it feel to be free, Mrs. Landon?" shouted one reporter as she made her way to the waiting car. Jemma paused and turned to face the cameras, her hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. "I'm grateful that the truth has finally come to light," she said quietly. "My husband died, almost believing that I had betrayed him, and that will haunt me for the rest of my life. But I'm also thankful that our child will be born into a world where justice prevailed, even if it took too long to arrive." The transition from prison to freedom was overwhelming. Jemma had to relearn how to make simple decisions like what to eat for breakfast or what clothes to wear. The outside world felt too bright, too loud, too chaotic after months of institutional routine. Patterson had arranged for her to stay in a private residence with round-the-clock security, away from the media circus that continued to surround her case. He also connected her with Dr. Rebecca Turner, a trauma therapist who specialized in helping wrongfully convicted individuals readjust to society. "What you've experienced is a form of severe trauma," Dr. Turner explained during their first session. "You've lost your husband, been falsely accused of terrible crimes, and pregnant under the most difficult circumstances. Healing will take time, and it's important to be patient with yourself." 3 weeks after her release, Jemma went into labor at Vanderbilt University Medical Center, the same hospital where George had died 8 months earlier. The irony wasn't lost on her as she was wheeled through the same corridors where she had said goodbye to her husband. Labor was long and difficult, complicated by the stress her body had endured during pregnancy. But when her son finally arrived at 3:47 a.m. on November 15th, weighing 7 pounds and 2 ounces, Gemma's heart was flooded with a love unlike anything she had ever experienced. The baby was the image of his father, the same gray eyes, the same strong jawline, even the same tiny cleft in his chin that had made George's smile so distinctive. When the nurses placed him in her arms for the first time, Jemma felt George's presence in the room as strongly as if he were standing beside her. "Hello, baby George," she whispered through her tears. "Your daddy would have loved you so much. He wanted you more than anything in the world." The decision to name him George Jr. had been easy. This child would carry his father's name, his father's legacy, and hopefully his father's capacity for love and redemption. But unlike his father, he would grow up knowing the truth about his family's story from the very beginning. The first few weeks of motherhood were a mixture of overwhelming joy and profound sadness. Every milestone, his first smile, his first grasp of her finger, his first peaceful sleep, was something she wished desperately that George could have witnessed. As George Jr. grew stronger and Jemma began to heal from her trauma, she felt a growing sense of purpose about how to honor George's memory. The settlement from her wrongful conviction lawsuit had restored their financial resources, but money wasn't what mattered to her anymore. "I want to establish a foundation in George's name," she told Patterson during a meeting when George Jr. was 3 months old. "Something that protects struggling artists from the kind of exploitation he once practiced and that ultimately led to our destruction." The George Landon Foundation was officially launched 6 months later, with a mission to provide legal resources, financial support, and advocacy for emerging musicians who were vulnerable to predatory contracts and industry exploitation. The foundation's headquarters was established in Nashville, with satellite offices in Los Angeles, New York, and Detroit. "Our goal is to ensure that no artist ever again falls victim to the kind of theft and exploitation that destroyed lives and families," Jemma said during the foundation's launch event. George spent the last years of his life trying to make amends for his past mistakes. This foundation will continue that work in his memory. The foundation's impact was immediate and significant. Within its first year, it had provided legal assistance to over 200 struggling musicians, helped recover stolen royalties worth millions of dollars, and successfully prosecuted several cases of music industry fraud. 2 years after George's death, Jemma found herself standing on a stage at the Grammy Awards. Not as a performer, but as a speaker advocating for artist rights and justice reform. Little George Jr., now a walking, babbling toddler with his father's curious eyes, sat in the front row with his nanny, clapping enthusiastically even though he didn't understand what was happening. 3 years ago, my husband and I believed our love story was complete, Jemma told the audience of music industry professionals. We had overcome betrayal, found forgiveness, and built something beautiful together. But we learned that love stories don't always have perfect endings. Sometimes they have meaningful ones instead. She spoke about the importance of second chances, about the need to protect vulnerable artists, and about how justice delayed is not justice denied. Her voice was strong and clear, carrying the authority of someone who had survived the worst that life could offer and emerged with her integrity intact. George's legacy isn't the mistakes he made in his past, she concluded. It's the man he became, the love he gave, and the positive change he inspired. Our son will grow up knowing that his father was someone who faced his demons, made amends, and used his remaining time on earth to lift others up. After the event, Jemma returned to their Nashville home, a smaller, more modest house than the estate she and George had shared, but filled with warmth and love. The walls were covered with photos of George, documentation of the foundation's work, and finger paintings that George Jr. had created with more enthusiasm than skill. As she tucked her son into bed that night, reading him a story about courage and kindness, Jemma felt a peace she hadn't experienced since before that terrible day when their world fell apart. "Daddy's watching over us," she whispered to George Jr., as his eyes grew heavy with sleep. "And he's proud of the strong, kind boy you're becoming." Outside, Nashville glittered with the lights of a music city that never slept, filled with dreamers and artists chasing their own second chances. And in a small house on the outskirts of town, a mother and son slept peacefully, surrounded by love that had transcended death and justice that had finally prevailed. The George Landon Foundation continued to grow, touching lives around the world, and ensuring that George's transformation from a man who stole dreams to one who protected them would be his lasting legacy. And every night, as Jemma kissed her son goodnight, she kept the promise she had made in that prison cell: to raise him with the truth, to honor his father's memory, and to prove that love really could conquer all, even death itself. My dear family, as we watch Jemma hold little George Jr., singing the same lullabies she once shared with his father, I'm reminded that love truly is stronger than death. George's love lives on in their son, in the foundation that protects other artists, and in Jemma's unbreakable spirit. Sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about perfect endings. They're about love that transforms lives, even when those lives are cut short. George and Jemma proved that people can change, that forgiveness is possible, and that even the deepest betrayal can be overcome. Tonight, remember that justice may be delayed, but it's never denied, and that the love we give and receive echoes far beyond our time on earth. Thank you for trusting me with your time tonight. Your support means everything to me. If you enjoyed this story, quickly hit that subscribe button, like, comment the moment you felt most in this story, and share with someone who needs to see it. Until next time, remember that you deserve love that transcends even the greatest tribulations.